Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing.
Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
Pistons fans, welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast brought to you by Believe and FanDuel Sportsbook. Aaron Johnson and Jasper Apollonia here with you this week. And after last week's podcast where it was doom and gloom, the Pistons are now above 500. They're coming off probably their best performance of the season, maybe their best win of the season against the Orlando Magic, and are now have a few days off before they play in Mexico City against the Dallas Mavericks. But Jasper, we're going to talk about all that and more. First things first, how are you doing this week, my friend?
I'm doing good, Aaron. I'm happy to be on here to talk more Pistons hoops. I feel like I'm finally back into the swing of things because I have like 8 different NBA.com statistics tabs open right now because I just have so many things that I want to talk about. And I know just like every single time I do that, we're going to finish this podcast and I'm going to have 3 different points that I wish I had brought up during the hour-long conversation. It always happens, but that's why we do this, because we both love talking hoops. You know, like you said, last week for you was a little bit of doom and gloom. For me, I was a little bit more positive, and I think especially after last night's game, 2 nights ago, if you're watching this the day it comes out on Friday, a game against the Orlando Magic, I think you're feeling a little bit better about it as well. Like you said, the Pistons are now 3-2. They have wins over the Rockets, the Magic, and the Boston Celtics, all teams that look to be, if not, going super far in the playoffs this year, at least look to be very competitive. And hey, even that opening night loss to the Chicago Bulls doesn't look so bad now, does it? They are 4-0, one of 4 undefeated teams in the NBA. So, yeah, things are looking a little bit up for the Detroit Pistons, especially going into a matchup on Saturday against the Dallas Mavericks that might be without Anthony Davis. So, could just be getting a little bit better.
I wanted to start things off here, just kind of looking back at one of the odds that we talked about, one of the awards that we talked about in the offseason. We talked about the Most Improved Player of the Year award amongst many of the other awards and props that are out there. And our friends at the FanDuel Sportsbook have Ausar Thompson at plus 1,500 to win the Most Improved Player of the Year award for the season, which is, I believe, right around where he was when we talked about it in the offseason. What's interesting now is how the board has shaken out through the first week or so of the NBA season, and particularly who is the favorite to win that award. And the co-favorite, is Amen Thompson at plus 950. Matas Buzelis is also at plus 950. But Amen Thompson, obviously Ausar Thompson's twin brother. I thought this was interesting because there is quite the separation in odds between the two. And when I looked at the stats and I, look at the impact, obviously we saw Amen play against Ausar and the Pistons last week. I just thought it was interesting that Amen was so much higher on the board on the odds list compared to Ausar Thompson. You look at the stats amongst the two, the points per game, they're essentially identical. Ausar is leading in rebounds per game. Amen's leading in assists per game. They average the same number of steals. Ausar has a slight lead in blocks per game. He's slightly more efficient from the field and from the three-point line. Efficient from the three-point line, really not a thing with either Thompson twin. And then Ausar Thompson also has only one less assist than Amen Thompson, but only half of the turnovers that Amen Thompson has. So just was curious looking at the odds boards right now as to how that's shaken out the way that it has. Not sure how you feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you watched the game and the only game you watched this season was the Rockets Pistons game, you wouldn't guess that Ausar is the Thompson brother with the worst odds. He definitely outplayed Amen in that game. I think for me, when I look at this line, look, it comes down to Amen has more opportunity than Ausar does this year. That's not to say Ausar doesn't have a tremendous opportunity in front of him, but look, Amen's playing like 33 minutes a game right now, and with Fred VanVleet going down, they have needed him more than ever to take a bigger role in their offense. Ausar has definitely taken a bigger role as well within the Pistons offense with Jaden Ivey going down, but it's a little bit of apples and oranges and what they're needed to do. Amen is really needed to be more of, frankly, a lead guard a lot of nights for this Rocket squad, whereas Ausar is that secondary playmaker. But look, if you look under the hood and you, instead of, like you said, the per game stats are very similar, the per 36 minute stats actually kind of paint Ausar in a more positive light than Amen. Per 36, Amen's averaging like 16 points, 5.5 rebounds. Basically, he's averaging like 15.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, 5.5 assists, a steal, and 0.3 blocks a game. Per 36, Ausar is at 18 points, 5.2 assists, 9.7 rebounds, and he's averaging 2.1 stocks per game, steals plus blocks combined, whereas Amen is at 1.4. So you already said, Ausar has a better field goal percentage on the season as well. There's a lot of indicators there that show that, look, Amen Thompson was the one that was projected to take this big leap this offseason. His productions actually remained pretty consistent with where he was last year. Ausar right now is the player that has taken the bigger leap on a per minute basis. Aaron, I don't know, as the season goes on, I don't know if you feel the same way I do. I think this narrative could change a little bit, especially as Ausar becomes more and more comfortable with the role he's in right now.
Yeah, this is definitely something to watch in my eyes. I think, Ausar is clearly, I agree that Amen has a bigger role and more opportunity in Houston just because they really don't have a point guard on the roster right now that's capable of giving them starting level minutes. But Ausar to me has a very clear range to go. I don't think there's really anything holding him back from playing 30 plus minutes a night outside of his foul trouble issues. That's an issue though that as a whole, I feel the Pistons are really struggling with right now, whether it's him, it's Ron Holland, it's Isaiah Stewart, it's Jalen Duren, even Cade Cunningham has had some foul trouble issues this year. So that's a team issue. That's trying to clash against their philosophy. They love playing so physical. They love getting in the other team's face, but it's right now a little bit too much because it's bleeding into foul trouble and it's forcing these guys to sit on the bench when this team already has been dealing with several rotation players out, and that's another problem in itself. But no, this is definitely something that I want to keep an eye on as the season continues. As I looked through FanDuel, I was surprised to see the gap between those two players, especially when it's Amen Thompson that has the highest odds amongst all players. I would have figured that Ausar was much closer to the top of the board, but there's several players that are in between them in the odds. So definitely one to keep an eye on as the season continues.
Yeah, no question about it. But I think as long as Ausar continues to put up the production that he has in these first 5 games, you're going to see his odds continue to rise as the season goes on because he's really making a mark right now for the Detroit Pistons. But Aaron, I mean, look, aside from the odds, if I told you, because we had this discussion last week on the podcast, hey, after that opening night loss, where do we see the Pistons' first win coming? I said they'd get it against Boston. You said you were afraid they might go on a 6-game losing streak here. They ended up getting it even sooner than that. They beat the Houston Rockets in what was definitely an upset. The Rockets looked really, really good against the defending champion Oklahoma City Thunder on opening night. They had that thriller, and the Pistons really took it to them in that game. That was a very competitive game between those two teams. And then look, they they started off really poorly against Boston, and what's been a theme for this season so far, the first quarters. By the way, you want a little gambling tip from me: take the under on Pistons first quarters and then hammer Pistons to cover for the rest of the game. That's turned out pretty well so far if that's what you've been on. But Aaron, they really handled the Boston Celtics in the second half of that game. And then after dropping the game to oh my gosh, why am I totally blanking on the what was their second loss?
In Cleveland?
Yeah, they got I tried to expunge that game from my mind. It was so horrible. They bounced back in a really big way against the Orlando Magic. They just absolutely manhandled them in the second half of that game. Again, after a really, really poor first quarter. So we've had some real ups and downs on this season so far. Like that opening night loss was definitely discouraging. That Cleveland loss was just horrible, and you saw pretty much everybody on the team play as poorly as they can. And then you have last night happen, and you have an absolute masterclass from Cade Cunningham in the final three quarters of that game. He dropped, he ended the first quarter with 4 points and 1 steal. He finished the game with 30 points, 10 assists, 6 rebounds, 3 steals, and 3 blocks to go along with, oh, by the way, 0 turnovers. So it's been a real up and down first week or so of the season, hasn't it?
No, that's been my exact takeaway on the Pistons is they've very much been a Jekyll and Hyde team so far this year. And the real recipe behind that starts with how they come out in games. They have the 29th worst net rating amongst all teams in the first quarter. The only team that plays worse in the first quarter than the Detroit Pistons is the 0-5 Brooklyn Nets. So you're not in good company. And the gap between them and the 28th ranked team in first quarter net rating is quite significant. So they are one of the worst first quarter teams in the league by far. It is really just every game they come out and they put themselves in such a hole. And on some nights, you'll be able to dig yourself out of the hole. An NBA game is 48 minutes long. But on other nights, especially when you're playing genuinely good teams, those teams are going to put you away early and they're going to bury you. And even when they came out against Cleveland and actually started the first quarter, they probably had the best start to the first quarter of the season against Cleveland. They still ended up trailing by the end of it because they wavered off after the first 6 to 8 minutes of the quarter. Of course, that was the game that I decided to attend and go out on Monday night with some buddies and go watch them play. I couldn't have just waited till the Magic game. So went out and saw them play an absolutely tragic level of basketball against the Cleveland Cavaliers, who then went on to lose to the Boston Celtics, who the Pistons had just beaten prior to that. So that just goes to show you how wonky the NBA is and how on any given night, any given team could win. But again, for the Pistons, this Jekyll and Hyde start to the season, it starts with how they come out in games. They have started every single game poorly. And again, on some nights, you're going to have the horses that can make up the footing in the race and get you back in it. On other nights, you're going to fall behind and you're never going to catch up. So the first quarter is an issue. If we're talking about things in general that have been an issue for Detroit, it's the fouling. I already kind of alluded to it at the beginning of the show, but Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, Ron Holland, Ausar Thompson, even Cade Cunningham. These are all guys that at some point this season have spent significant time in foul trouble and has put them on the bench. When you play into the fact that they're also playing these games without Jaden Ivey, Marcus Sasser, and Karis LeVert, that's not a recipe for success. They were seriously playing Dennis Jenkins, Chaz Lanier, Javonte Green, all considerable minutes in at least one or two of these games so far this season. So a lot of up and down for Detroit so far. There's definitely been some good. I'm kind of just focusing on some of the negatives that have stood out to me so far. I mean, you can look at the three-point shooting as another thing that's going to be a huge swing factor for this team. They don't have the three-point shooting right now that is probably necessary in today's landscape. You could feel it at the start of every game. It plays into the slow starts. Cade Cunningham's out there, and the Pistons haven't quite figured out how to get Duncan Robinson a lot of clean looks in the offense. It's something that I noticed in the Chicago game, and it hasn't really changed ever since. Their sets that they run are not conducive to getting him a clean, open look. Duncan Robinson is not the type of three-point shooter that a Tim Hardaway Jr. or a Malik Beasley was. Duncan Robinson needs some space, and he needs some time to let it go. And when he has those things, he is a great shooter, but he does not have the movement. He does not have the contested three-point shooting abilities that those two guys did. And I think the Pistons are still trying to adjust to that. But at the end of this spiel, we still come out and look at the fact that this is a 3-2 win team, and there's a lot going wrong, but they're still above 500.
Yeah, and look, the two losses they have are to, again, like an undefeated Chicago Bulls team that definitely, look, I know you and I did not super buy into the hype of their offseason. I think they will
fall off a cliff. They will fall off a cliff.
I think the vibes are very good in Chicago. That's kind of the thing, is like, after having seen what the Pistons did last year with some better vibes and some better roster construction, I think the Bulls at least can make the play in this year and look okay doing it. The Cleveland Cavaliers, they are just an issue for the Pistons and have been for a while now. But yeah, like you said, they are 3-2 right now, despite the issues. And frankly, I don't think they've played very well this season. Like, when you look at, like, they have not played very well, but then you look at their upcoming schedule, like we said, they're playing the Mavericks, who are, I think there's a good chance the Mavericks are going to be without Anthony Davis. He left the game last night. And then they're playing the Grizzlies, the Jazz, the Nets, the 76ers, and the Washington Wizards. That's their next 6 games. And looking at that stretch, you're looking at it and you're going, there's not really a good reason why they shouldn't go 5-1. So you could be very easily looking at this team being 8-3, and not having played particularly all that great of basketball, even with their star players. Like, Cade had a great game last night. That was a classic vintage Cade Cunningham game where you just go, they can't stop this dude. Like, when he's one-on-one, they can't stop him. But the reason that happened is because the rest of Detroit's cast stepped up. Like, they stepped up a little bit. Jalen Duren has been, you talk about a guy who's been like, the highs have been really high, the lows have been really low. There's been games where he's been basically unplayable. There's been 2 games where he's literally not been able to play. He got ejected from one, like fouled out of another. Isaiah Stewart has also fouled out of 2 games so far this year. So they have a huge issue there. Opponents are getting to the free throw line at a 41% clip. That's the second worst in the NBA. Although, let's be honest, if you watched last night's game, that was an absolute disaster class by those referees. The fact the Pistons scored 136 points, I don't know how. There was a whistle every 30 seconds, and it was the Magic going to the line every time.
That's been every Piston game. They are just destined to play 3-hour games all year long.
And I'm not saying they don't foul. Like, I'm not saying this is not a physical team that doesn't foul, but the last night was just absurd, the whistle that the Magic were getting compared to the Pistons. But it's not what I want to talk about. And then, yeah, you hit on it. Like, they're not hitting shots at the rate they need to right now. They are one of the bottom 5 teams in effective field goal percentage this season. They at like 52%. They are just not hitting shots at a good clip. They're shooting 32% on threes for the season. They are, as I said, the volume is still an issue, and that can basically be explained by the difference in, Malik Beasley last year took 9 threes a game. Duncan Robinson this year is taking 6 threes a game. Do you know what the difference in the amount of threes the Pistons took last year to this year is? it's 3 attempts a game. So like you said, that movement shooting is still definitely an issue. But Ausar Thompson looks like he's taken another step in his development. Ron Holland looks like he's taken another step in his development. Isaiah Stewart looks really locked in, honestly, on both ends of the court this year. He's looked a lot better offensively than he has in the past, even if he does miss way too many easy bunnies for my taste. And like I said, like Ron Holland's definitely taken that step forward. And when Jalen Duren has played well this year, he's played at a level that I don't think we've necessarily seen from him in the past.
It's no shock that the 2 games that the Pistons have won, or 2 of the 3 that the Pistons have won, are games where Jalen Duren dominates.
Yep.
He is a crucial part of this Detroit Pistons team. And I have seen him do things this year that when he is able to stay on the court, he's doing things that he has not been able to do in the past. I think about, you can look at a couple games this year, but I mean, even just like the Orlando game last night, it's top of mind. And I think about just how easy it was for him to hunt and how easy it was for the Pistons to get the ball at him when the Magic brought in Goga Bitadze. And Jalen Duren was playing, outside of the paint and getting to the rim and doing some of that stuff where he is putting the ball on the floor and he is driving to the basket and he's going one-on-one. And I vividly remember watching that last year and being like, okay, this is not there yet. It's not efficient basketball for him. He turns the ball over. He dribbles it off his leg. He loses the handle. He gets stonewalled. He puts up a bad shot. And this year when he's doing it, he looks so much more comfortable. He's becoming way more effective at using his body, using his speed. He's willing to take that 1 or 2 bumps and then go up. And that's something he didn't have the patience for, or maybe even the body for last year. He has really morphed his offensive game. And it hasn't been in the, sense that everyone would expect it to in today's day and age, where he's hitting 16 to 18 foot middies or he's taking corner threes. He's still doing some old school type things, playing in the paint, but it is so important to giving the Pistons another element in their offense, giving Cade Cunningham a chance to not have to do everything on offense for this team. Again, it's been up and down. It's tracked with the Pistons season with Jalen Duren, but when he's going, he has been a huge factor for Detroit.
Yeah, so much of it goes with mentality. And one other thing we should also mention in regards to Jalen Duren this year and improving his offensive game, shooting 84% on free throws right now. Yes. And don't get it twisted. Those have been important 3 throws he's been hitting. I think it goes hand in hand. And also, let's also not forget, he's getting to the line 6 times a game. So when he's on the floor and he's locked in, he's been able to impose himself physically on opposing defenses. You saw it in the Boston game in particular. Look, if he and Isaiah Stewart don't do the work on the boards they do in that game, the Pistons don't win. No ifs, ands, and buts about it. They won that game by imposing themselves physically on Boston on the boards. They just beat them up. And you saw that against Orlando as well. And I think this is why after game 1, I was a little higher on Detroit than you were, is because I still think they have that mentality that they had last year. And it's coming from the players more than it is from the coaches even. I think it's become a little bit more ingrained. Something I've noticed this year, JB Bickerstaff is a little less vocal than he has been, than he was last year. I just haven't noticed him. Not that he's not young, still talking to the refs all the time and pleading his case all the time, but it's a little less than it was last year. And I've seen, like last night, seeing Tobias Harris, and then after that, Jalen Duren and Ron Holland and Isaiah Stewart go at the Orlando Magic. Like there was that exchange between Tobias and Paolo on the free throw line, which I cannot say out loud. I can't say any of those words on a podcast. Even online, I can't say those words. But I really thought that was like so indicative of when why I still think this team can grind out a bunch of wins even when they're banged up, is because like Tobias just went like, I don't care. Screw you. I'm going at your neck all game, and I'm going to talk to you all game. And it worked. Paolo missed both of those free throws. Paolo bricked them, and he just looked frustrated and out of it for the rest of the game. He still got his numbers because he went to the line 17 times last night. But really, after that exchange, it felt like something shifted, and the Magic
100%.
never really got back into it. And that is a team that you're seeing like have the opposite thing, where they changed up their roster this offseason, bringing in Desmond Bane. They started believing some of their own hype, and they're really struggling. They mentally, it seems like something has shifted there, and not for the better. With the Pistons, it does feel as though internally they're so strong in the way that they talk to each other, they believe in each other, and they operate as a unit. I don't know if you read the Ausar Thompson piece that came out in the Players Tribune today, Aaron, but there's a part in it where he talks about Tim Hardaway Jr. and Tobias Harris getting on, and Malik Beasley as well, getting on the players last year, and Tobias Harris saying, we need to bring playoff basketball to Detroit. Like, that to me is the mental makeup of this team, and it's why even with all the negatives right now on both ends of the floor, I still really believe in them. And I still think that they are a legitimate contender in the East if they can just fix a couple things.
Plus the expectation that you're going to get Jaden Ivey back at some point in the not like super, super far off future. Like, hopefully you can get him back before the end of 2025. I think for Detroit, if you just are looking at stats, they're a bottom half of the league team in 3-point attempts. They're a bottom half of the league in 3-point field goal percentage, and they're one of just the least efficient field goal shooting teams in the league. Well, how do you make up for that so that you can play winning basketball, so that you can score enough points to be in games? Well, they are top 12 in free throw attempts per game. They are a top 3 team in offensive rebounds per game, and they play very competitive defense around the rim. They have the most blocks per game in the league. So the Pistons, for as offensively challenged as they are, and I think that this kind of piggybacks on your point about this team and how they've grown from last year and how they've adapted, is like they understand, okay, we might be deficient in these areas. We really have to lean on our strengths. I mean, they attack the offensive glass like a team, like very few teams can. And it's because of the hustle that they play with. And that sounds like so cliche coming out of the mouth. And for probably 29 other NBA teams, it would be a cliche thing to say. But for Detroit, it really just is like how they play. It is like one of the key buzzwords in there. And when they talk is like hustle, heart, those types of words. They go at the offensive glass like few other teams, and they have the athletes to do it and the size to do it. When you look at Jalen, Duren, Ausar Thompson, Isaiah Stewart, those guys create so many second chance opportunities for even someone like Paul Reed. When Paul Reed gets in the game, he does not ever give up on a possession. And sometimes it is a situation where it's like Paul Reed giveth, and he makes a nice play to extend a possession or get an offensive rebound. Then he takes it right away because he throws it away on an errant pass or a bad decision, whatever. But they just have this mentality of like, okay, we might not really be good at putting the ball in the hoop organically and in the half court, but we're going to do the hustle things that are going to give us these opportunities to finish around the rim at a second chance rate that's amongst the highest in the league. We're going to create opportunities to get out and run, play off our defense. And I tweeted it yesterday during the Orlando game, but that really is the swing thing for Detroit. With the struggles that they have in the half court, they need to be able to turn defense into offense. And when this team plays defense, it allows them to generate turnovers, that allows them to get stops and get out and run in transition. And that is clearly where they have a very high ceiling to dominate because of the speed and athleticism that they have. being able to play on a man advantage rather than having to run half court sets where you have 2 or 3 guys in the court that really aren't floor spacers in today's landscape. Like, that's a really big deal. So 3-2, and I think we're both sitting here saying, like, Pistons really haven't played all that well. There's clearly another level for them to get to, even without having Jaden Ivey back in the fold.
No question about it, Aaron. I mean, top 10 in offensive rebounding percentage on the year, top 10 in forcing opposing teams to turn the ball over. And like you said, when you're a team that is shooting really, really poorly, just creating those extra opportunities for your offense. They haven't even really played that well in transition. But the fact is they are getting the opportunities. And if you force enough turnovers, if you get enough second chance opportunities, you are going to put up points. Just ask the Boston Celtics. I mean, at the end of that game, I think there was like 4 straight possessions where the Pistons scored after missing a shot.
Was it 4 or was it 6?
It might have been 6.
I think
it was at least 4 in a row. And it wasn't just that they missed like one shot. They missed multiple shots on multiple of those possessions, and they crashed the boards. And look, they won that game by 6. There's no way they don't win that game if they aren't crashing the boards like that. And I just think that, like, as of right now, when I look at this team, they are still figuring things out in the way that, like, what is the best way to run our offense, especially with Jaden Ivey out of there and Karis LeVert having not played. You know, they're still figuring out lineups very clearly. You saw a 2 big lineup for a couple minutes last night with Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart in the first quarter. I think that's the first time they've played with that this season. You've seen some, I think I saw Karis LeVert. He had his first game back, playing a little bit with Cade and then also playing with Ausar, which was interesting to me as well. And then there was a point where I believe it was just Karis, and then they had Ron Holland as the 2, and they were playing like a big lineup there. So they're clearly still trying to figure out what the best thing to do in this regard is. And I think even some of Cade's early season struggles, so to speak, I think some of those are him trying to involve his teammates in a different way than he has last year. Not just spamming the same actions over and over again. Somebody asked him the other day, I think it might have been Ku Khalil actually, asked him about his post-up game because it was something that was very noticeable. You know, Cade killed teams with his jump hooks last year. Hadn't really been doing a whole lot of them. This year, spammed the hell out of him in the Orlando game. He was just getting into into there and then hooking them, and then after that, it's all about his moves and counter moves. Like, you know, he had that beautiful spin on Franz Wagner. That spin only happens because he hit those hooks in the lane to begin with. So when he, you know, goes into Franz and he starts leaning into the paint, Franz immediately is going to put a body into him. Boom, spin move, easy layup. Like, that's when Cade Cunningham's at his absolute best. And I think I haven't seen as many combo moves from him. And I think a little bit of it has been him kind of trying to figure out what he can do offensively this year and what he can get away with, what he can't get away with, and trying to get the other guys involved in the offense and grow their confidence. And I think you're seeing a little bit of that. It helps that the Orlando Magic have been absolute ass defensively this year. But hey, when you come out and lay a stinker against the Cavs, you know, to have that mental resiliency to come back the next game and get guys involved, I think that that's really, really key. And it's something that I'm keeping an eye on. I do think it's going to take like a week or two for Cade to start ramping up his full arsenal, but I think you're going to start seeing it more and more. Like, another thing I've noticed with him, beginning of games, he's shooting threes. Like, he's coming out and he's just shooting like 2-3 threes to start the game before he even gets into the lane once. And like, to me, that speaks of a team that has confidence in themselves that they can maintain a level of winning while they try and figure things out and wait for guys to get healthy again. So yeah, I don't know, man. I think it's easy to look at the underlying metrics with this team and be a little negative and be kind of negative and be like, "Oh, the offense is broken. The defense isn't as good as we hoped it is." And you look at the record and go like, "Well, they're 3-2." I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think they're struggling in a lot of ways, but it's not hard for me to see them really turning it around really quickly. And last night's game really showed me why. And then again, like I said, you look at this schedule, look at this next 6 games. That is a stretch where you expect to win at least 4 of those next 6 games. So, yeah, I think they're in a decent position, Aaron. And especially like with Trajan Langdon saying on Zach Lowe's podcast that they don't anticipate the Jaden Ivey thing being significant in any way. I think that has to help your confidence a lot there as well.
Definitely. I do want to go back to the first quarter stuff for Detroit, and particularly the starting lineup for Detroit. Through 5 games, obviously the numbers as bad as they are, I just don't know how, I don't know if I'm necessarily against changing the starting lineup for the Detroit Pistons, but I just don't know how they would change it, because the only guy that you could feasibly move out of it is Duncan Robinson, but they don't really have a good replacement for him in the starting lineup. Like, yeah, you could throw Karis LeVert out there, but you'd be putting even less shooting on the court for, maybe some better ball handling. But I think they're just going to have to work through the first quarter stuff right now. I think part of it is, figuring out the half-court offense. You're not running as much right away in the first quarter of games. It's a lot more of getting into your sets, getting a feel, and the Pistons have struggled with that. I think they have to continue to give that some time, because they don't really think they have the personnel to change the starting lineup. But I was just curious what your thoughts were on that, because I just don't see how they do it. And I understand that Duncan Robinson is incredibly limited outside of the shooting on offense. He does not give you anything on defense. He gets hunted a ton on defense. But I think that his gravity is important enough to, when you look at the rest of the roster, there's just not a good enough replacement that's going to give them at least some level of shooting, and then a big enough increase in defense to make a change real feasible until Jaden Ivey can come back.
Yeah, I think for me at this point, I'm hoping it's like sample size theater, because look, that the starting lineup is the only lineup that the Pistons have, 5-man lineup that the Pistons have, that has played more than 14 minutes together on the season. And the second highest one involves Paul Reed. So I think we can anticipate, or at least hope, that that's not going to be, the trend moving forward. Look, they're just turning the ball over way too much. I mean, the starting lineup has a 20% turnover percentage. 1 out of every 5 possessions, they are giving the ball away. And their true shooting is under 50%. They're just not executing right now. I think, look, for me, I agree with you. I don't see an easy fix to this right now. And frankly, I don't know if they need to. I think this is something that they can work through. And again, like I said, like Kate Cunningham's been taking just opening games, like shooting threes, and he hasn't started off so hot for most of these contests. I think a lot of it just kind of comes down to that. I think what's encouraging is that when the first guys of the bench unit come in, which are Isaiah Stewart and Ron Holland, that, again, it's 8 minutes, but that they have performed extremely well. And I just think it's kind of one of those things where when they have the ability to lock in at one end of the floor or the other, it really ups their play. And when they get the bench guys in, I think there's really this idea of, okay, we have to lock in on the defensive end of the floor. That's what these guys are here for. And that's when you start creating the turnovers. That's when you start really, getting the hustle plays up, hitting the offensive boards a little bit more. I just think they're kind of a slow starting team right now. And it's definitely something to monitor. But it's not something I'm especially worried with right now. For me, it's like, look, how many times have like Jalen Duren picked up 2 quick fouls in the first quarter, right? I think a lot of it's just kind of coming down to that. They're just coming out a little flat and then they lock in.
Yeah, I want to see the sample size go up as we continue to look at these numbers and see if it gets better. If this is a trend that continues onward, well, hopefully by then you're getting Jaden Ivey back in the fold and that elevates the opening lineup's performance. But it is still concerning when you're starting every game in a hole. Again, good teams are going to put them away. Luckily, though, if you look at their upcoming schedule, there is some real opportunity. They go to Mexico City to play Dallas, who might be without Anthony Davis. They're obviously already without Kyrie Irving. They get Memphis, who is 3-2 after John Morant buzzer beater. Then they get Utah. They get Brooklyn. They get a Philadelphia team that has been actually pretty good. They get Washington, and then they get the Bulls again. So the schedule for Detroit, and even through November, there is definitely some opportunity when you look at the teams that they're playing. The start of the season was always going to be a big test for this team. It obviously became a much bigger test when you lost your starting shooting guard in Jaden Ivey. And hey, the Pistons have weathered the storm. Again, we're sitting here, and a lot of the talk in this episode and this show has been about the stuff that's going wrong for this team. If they're above 500, they're 3-2. They're better than the Orlando Magic have been this year. An Orlando Magic team that, coming into the season, there were people out there, well-respected people that were like, hey, this team, they're gonna win the conference. They're gonna be one of the top 2 teams in the conference. And it's early in the season. Obviously, a lot can change. But so far, the Pistons have been better than Orlando. They have been, I believe they've been better than the Atlanta Hawks, who Trae Young exited the game for them the other night or last night. So that's another injury to keep an eye on when we start looking at how the East might shake out this year. So you look at the schedule, and there's a real opportunity for Detroit to hopefully figure out how to stop the up and down that they've been so far this year. You play well one game, you play bad the next, and then, you repeat the same cycle. Hopefully they're able to build a little momentum, continue to build on the chemistry and get a better flow in their offense, and it starts to lead to, some more consistent performances on a nightly basis.
Yeah, I just think they need to be what they are for now until they get Jaden Ivey back. And I think at that point, you can really start saying, okay, what are our real expectations for this team moving forward on the season? But yeah, you look at that November schedule, there's no reason they shouldn't be 3 or 4 games over 500 by the end of November. Like, there's really no excuse for it. And if they're not, then that's definitely going to be an issue. But I just don't anticipate that being the case. Like, I think that they can grind out more than enough wins in the meantime to be a little patient right now and see really what they're going to need moving forward. And, maybe this is just going to be a year where they kind of tread water and they stay in that, 3 to 6 seed kind of range. And maybe they don't take the big step forward as a team, but certain players do. And they kind of figure out what they need to do going into next year. Of course, there's still Jaden Ivey contract, Jalen Duren contract, and then Ausar Thompson will be extension eligible this offseason as well. So they're going to have to get some answers there. But for me, this is really an opportunity for them to continue to grind out games, gel as a team, really back up that identity, and see where they are. And hopefully by the trade deadline, they'll have some real answers on whether, where they are in the Eastern Conference playoff race, and whether maybe they're not making a big consolidation move, but if they should make some moves for this season to try and move themselves forward. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely the negatives, Aaron, but it's really just nice to be like, there are issues with this team. There are issues that might not even be fixable, but it's not the end of the season. Like it was in years past. You know what I mean? Where it's like, they still can win games. They still have the talent. They still have the culture. It's just like, boy, how nice to be positive about the negatives.
I'm also still interested in seeing Marcus Sasser back in the fold here, with Jaden Ivey out for probably at least another month. I think just because of his ball handling and shooting skill sets, he might be able to give Detroit a little bit of a boost on the offensive side of the court. Can they hide him? Can they make it work defensively? That'll be the next question. But he's been listed as questionable now for the last 2 or 3 games on the injury report. So it feels like, we could see him make his season debut any game now. And I think that his skill set could be a nice injection into this team. So I'll be keeping an eye on getting Marcus Sasser back and seeing if he might be a little bit of a help to Detroit's offensive struggles.
That's a good point, Aaron, because that's the one thing I was going to say that I don't think waiting and seeing will change anything about is the 3-point shooting. Like they need help there. They are going to continue to need help unless Marcus Sasser can come back and provide something more than what we've seen from him in the past. Or unless Jaden Ivey can come back and provide the same level of efficiency as he did last year on 3-point shots with even higher attempts. So, yeah, that's the one thing I definitely am concerned about for this season. They are going to have to figure out something in regards to the 3-point shooting. And you even hit on it, like with the types of 3-point shooting looks that they're getting to. That is the one thing I don't see changing unless Marcus Sasser or Jaden Ivey can provide more than what we've expected from them in the past.
No doubt. Well, Jasper, anything else before we wrap off and we get another day until the Pistons play the Dallas Mavericks in Mexico City?
No, that's about it for me for now. I'm just excited to see how this team continues to grow in this next couple weeks. I still think we're going to have some ugly games. There are going to be some games where they look like crap, but I think there's going to be some really satisfying wins in there as well. And when we get to some of the more challenging teams in terms of their schematics, I'm thinking the Philadelphia 76ers right now with, we'll see if Embiid plays in that game, but with VJ Edgecombe going off and Tyrese Maxey just being an absolute flamethrower to start the season, that's going to be a really interesting defensive matchup for Detroit. So I'm interested to see how they continue to improve and what happens and who they can match up well with in the East, because they're going to get some opportunities to show what they have coming up soon.
Yeah, the schedule upcoming for Detroit is full of opportunity for them to find a better flow and start showing some consistency against some weaker competition in the coming weeks. But that is going to do it for this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. Make sure you hit the like button, the follow button, the subscribe button, wherever you watched or listened to today's show from. We greatly appreciate it. From myself, Aaron Johnson, and my co-host, Jasper Apollonia, thanks so much for listening to this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Believe and our friends over at the FanDuel Sportsbook. We'll see you guys next time.